Goblin sharks are nightmare fuel. They possess telescoping jaws that launch forward like a horror movie monster, bodies that look like prehistoric aliens, and hunting strategies that make no biological sense. Well, a few days ago, I stumbled across this incredible footage of a goblin shark feeding. At first glance, it seems almost cartoonish, like something from a science fiction film. But what this creature is doing represents one of the most bizarre feeding mechanisms in the ocean. When prey comes within range, the goblin shark's jaw literally explodes outward, extending almost 40% of its head length in a fraction of a second. To marine biologists, that single feeding event reveals something extraordinary about evolution's capacity for creating solutions that seem to violate everything we think we know about vertebrate anatomy. Now, some researchers debate whether this feeding mechanism evolved for specific prey types, or represents a more generalized hunting adaptation. But here's what's undeniable. This ancient predator has remained virtually unchanged for over 125 million years, surviving mass extinctions that wiped out the dinosaurs. It's a living fossil that shouldn't exist in today's oceans, yet somehow thrives in the deep sea's most challenging environments. And that's where the mystery begins. Because this isn't just another weird deep-sea creature. The goblin shark challenges fundamental assumptions about predator evolution, biomechanics, and survival strategies. This single species forces us to reconsider what we thought we knew about how life adapts to extreme environments and why some evolutionary designs persist across geological timescales. And this is just the beginning of how strange goblin sharks truly are. They've been found at depths exceeding 4,000 feet, in waters so cold and pressurized that most vertebrates cannot survive. They possess sensory systems that detect electrical fields weaker than a car battery, at distances of several feet. Their skeletal structure defies conventional fish anatomy, and their reproductive strategies remain almost completely unknown to science. One specimen captured off Japan measured over 12 feet long, yet we've never observed their mating behavior or identified their nursery grounds. But here's the thing that should absolutely blow your mind. The goblin shark represents what scientists call an evolutionary dead end that somehow kept living. Most lineages that remain unchanged for millions of years eventually go extinct because they can't adapt to changing conditions. Social species like dolphins and primates evolve rapidly, developing complex behaviors and group dynamics. But goblin sharks are solitary hunters who've maintained the same basic body plan since before flowering plants existed on land. So how did a creature with no evolutionary innovation, no social learning, and anatomy that seems fundamentally flawed become one of the ocean's most successful deep-sea predators? To understand just how bizarre goblin sharks really are, we need to examine their jaw mechanism in detail. And I mean really examine it, because what we find there challenges every assumption we have about how vertebrate feeding is supposed to work. Most sharks, like great whites or tigers, rely on powerful bite forces delivered through rigid jaw structures. The skull provides a stable platform, and massive jaw muscles generate crushing power through direct mechanical advantage. It's a system optimized for cutting through flesh and bone with brute force. The goblin shark jaw system follows an entirely different blueprint. A goblin shark possesses what can only be described as a ballistic feeding mechanism. The entire jaw apparatus sits on a complex system of cartilaginous supports and elastic ligaments that function like a loaded crossbow. When the shark detects prey, specialized muscles release this stored elastic energy, launching the jaws forward with explosive speed. This isn't simply extending the mouth to grab food. This is genuine projectile feeding. Researchers have measured jaw protrusion speeds exceeding 20 feet per second. The entire feeding event, from jaw extension to retraction, occurs in less than 1/10 of a second. And when you consider the goblin shark's hunting environment, this mechanism makes profound sense. These animals hunt in the deep ocean's midnight zone, where prey is scarce and widely scattered. Most deep-sea creatures are adapted for energy conservation, moving slowly to preserve limited resources. But a slow-moving predator faces a fundamental problem. Alert prey can easily escape conventional pursuit. The goblin shark's solution bypasses this limitation entirely. Rather than chasing prey, it becomes a living mousetrap. The shark approaches slowly, conserving energy, then deploys its jaw like a biological harpoon gun. The prey never sees it coming. And their sensory system presents its own fascinating adaptations. Goblin sharks possess highly developed electroreceptors called ampullae of Lorenzini, sensory organs that detect the minute electrical fields generated by living organisms. Every muscle contraction, every heartbeat, every neural impulse produces a weak electrical signature. The goblin shark can perceive these bioelectrical fields through several feet of water and sediment. This capability allows them to hunt effectively in complete darkness, detecting buried fish, squid, and crustaceans that would be invisible to vision-based predators. They're essentially living electrical sensors, scanning the seafloor for the faintest signs of life. But here's where the system becomes truly remarkable. The electroreceptors are concentrated around the shark's elongated rostrum, that bizarre flattened snout that makes them look so alien. This extended sensory platform functions like a biological metal detector, sweeping back and forth across the substrate. When the shark locates prey, those same electroreceptors help guide the ballistic jaw strike with pinpoint accuracy. It's an integrated hunting system that has no equivalent in modern marine predators. Which brings us to perhaps the most perplexing aspect of goblin shark biology. Their evolutionary history suggests they should have gone extinct millions of years ago. The goblin shark belongs to an ancient lineage called Mitsukurinidae. During the Cretaceous period, over 100 million years ago, this family included numerous species distributed throughout the world's oceans. Fossil evidence shows goblin shark relatives living in shallow tropical seas, hunting alongside marine reptiles and early marine mammals. But then something changed. Climate shifts, ocean chemistry alterations, or competitive pressure from more advanced shark species drove most Mitsukurinians extinct. The modern goblin shark represents the sole surviving member of this once diverse family. It's what paleontologists call a relict species, an evolutionary holdover that persisted while its relatives vanished. Most relict species survive by retreating to isolated refugia, remote locations where they can avoid competition and environmental pressures. Island environments often harbor relict species, because geographic isolation protects them from more advanced competitors. The goblin shark chose a different refuge. It retreated vertically, abandoning the competitive shallow waters for the deep ocean's vast emptiness. This vertical migration solved multiple problems simultaneously. The deep sea harbors relatively few large predators, reducing competition for resources. The stable temperature and pressure conditions change slowly over geological time, eliminating the environmental pressures that drove extinction in surface waters. And the scattered prey distribution actually favors the goblin shark's ambush hunting strategy over the pursuit tactics of more conventional predators. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible deep-sea discoveries that will change how you see ocean life forever. But this raises a genuinely fascinating question. What is the subjective experience of hunting in perpetual darkness? When a goblin shark detects electrical fields through its rostrum, is it constructing a mental map of its environment? Or is this purely reflexive behavior? The evidence suggests something between pure instinct and deliberate hunting strategy. Goblin sharks demonstrate individual variation in hunting behavior, suggesting some degree of learning. Specimens captured at different locations show preference for different prey types, despite having access to similar species. This indicates behavioral flexibility, rather than rigid instinctual programming. Yet the lightning-fast jaw strike operates too quickly for conscious control during execution. The truth likely involves high-level decisions about where to hunt and when to strike, with the actual feeding mechanics handled automatically by specialized neural circuits. We're observing predation that doesn't map neatly onto our categories of learned versus instinctual behavior, and that ambiguity reveals something important about deep-sea cognition. Beyond their extraordinary jaw mechanics, goblin sharks demonstrate other adaptations that extend well into territory we typically associate with more advanced predators. Their body structure represents a masterclass in deep-sea engineering. The goblin shark's skeleton consists almost entirely of cartilage rather than bone. This isn't simply a primitive characteristic retained from their ancient ancestry. In the deep ocean, cartilaginous skeletons provide significant advantages over bony alternatives. Cartilage is significantly less dense than bone, helping maintain neutral buoyancy in water columns, where slight density differences determine whether an animal sinks or floats. Bone requires constant metabolic energy to maintain and repair. Cartilage grows continuously and requires minimal metabolic investment. For a predator living in nutrient-poor environments, this represents substantial energy savings over the shark's lifetime. Their pink coloration, often cited as evidence of their alien appearance, actually serves the important functional purpose. In the deep ocean's red-filtered light environment, red and pink pigments appear black or gray, providing effective camouflage against the dark water background. The goblin shark's soft, flabby body tissue further enhances this camouflage by eliminating the rigid silhouette that might alert prey to danger. And then there's their size flexibility. Unlike most shark species that reach a maximum length and stop growing, goblin sharks appear to grow continuously throughout their lives. The largest confirmed specimen measured over 12 feet, but reports of 18-foot individuals suggest they may grow much larger. This indeterminate growth pattern is typically associated with animals that face minimal predation pressure and abundant food resources. But goblin sharks live in some of Earth's most food-scarce environments. Their ability to grow continuously despite resource limitations suggests remarkable metabolic efficiency. They've essentially optimized their biology for extracting maximum nutrition from minimal food input, then investing that energy in continued growth rather than reproduction or activity. This brings us to one of marine biology's most persistent mysteries. Nobody has ever observed goblin shark reproduction. Despite over a century of scientific study, we have no confirmed observations of mating behavior, pregnancy, or juvenile development. We don't know where they reproduce, how often they breed, or how many offspring they produce. This reproductive mystery becomes even more intriguing when we consider their global distribution. Goblin sharks have been captured off Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Europe, and both coasts of the Americas. This worldwide distribution suggests either remarkable mobility or reproductively isolated populations that somehow maintain genetic connectivity across ocean basins. The few pregnant females captured have contained between 2 and 8 developing embryos, suggesting small litter sizes typical of deep-sea species. But the gestation period, mating season, and nursery habitat locations remain completely unknown. It's as if this species reproduces in a parallel dimension that intersects with our ocean only occasionally. Some researchers theorize that goblin sharks migrate vertically through the water column for reproduction, rising from their typical deep-sea habitat to breed in mid-water environments. Others suggest they gather at specific deep-sea geographic features, like underwater mountains or thermal vents. But without direct observation, these remain educated speculation. This reproductive mystery highlights a broader challenge in deep-sea biology. The deep ocean represents Earth's largest habitat, yet we know less about its inhabitants than we do about the surface of Mars. The pressure, darkness, and technical challenges of deep-sea research mean that most deep-sea species remain poorly understood. The goblin shark simply represents an extreme example of this knowledge gap. Their feeding behavior reveals another layer of complexity that challenges traditional predator categorizations. Analysis of stomach contents from captured specimens shows remarkably diverse prey selection. Goblin sharks consume fish, squid, crustaceans, and even other sharks. But the size range of prey items suggests opportunistic feeding rather than specialized hunting. Small specimens have been found with tiny krill and copepods in their stomachs, while large individuals contained whole fish exceeding 2 feet in length. This size flexibility indicates that goblin sharks adjust their feeding strategy based on available opportunities, rather than targeting specific prey types. Laboratory studies of captured specimens have revealed additional behavioral complexity. Goblin sharks demonstrate individual recognition, responding differently to familiar versus unfamiliar human handlers. This requires memory formation and retention, cognitive abilities typically associated with more neurologically complex species. They also exhibit what can only be described as curiosity. Captive goblin sharks investigate novel objects placed in their environment, approaching and examining items that pose no threat and offer no obvious benefit. This exploratory behavior serves no immediate survival function, suggesting cognitive processes beyond basic survival programming. But perhaps most remarkably, they show behavioral adaptation to captivity. Wild-caught goblin sharks initially refuse food and demonstrate stress behaviors. Over time, successful specimens learn to accept offered food and modify their hunting behavior to function in confined spaces. This behavioral plasticity indicates genuine learning ability, rather than rigid instinctual responses. These cognitive abilities seem inconsistent with their primitive appearance and ancient evolutionary lineage. We typically associate learning, memory, and behavioral flexibility with more recently evolved species that face complex social or environmental challenges. The goblin shark's combination of ancient anatomy with sophisticated behavior challenges our assumptions about the relationship between evolutionary age and cognitive complexity. And this brings us to the central paradox. Goblin sharks are living fossils, essentially unchanged for over 100 million years. Conventional evolutionary theory suggests that species remaining static for such extended periods should be outcompeted by more advanced organisms. Yet goblin sharks not only survived, they've thrived enough to maintain global populations across multiple ocean basins. The answer appears to lie in niche specialization rather than competitive superiority. Goblin sharks occupy an ecological role that few other predators can fill effectively. Their combination of energy-efficient metabolism, specialized sensory systems, and ballistic feeding mechanics creates a predator perfectly adapted for deep-sea ambush hunting. The deep ocean's unique environmental conditions favor their specific adaptations over more conventional predatory strategies. High-speed pursuit requires enormous energy expenditure in an environment where calories are precious. Complex social behaviors provide no advantage when prey encounters are rare and unpredictable. Advanced sensory systems like echolocation are less effective than electroreception for detecting buried or camouflaged prey. In other words, goblin sharks succeeded by becoming highly specialized for an environment that rewards efficiency over innovation. They represent evolution's solution to a very specific set of ecological challenges, challenges that haven't changed significantly over millions of years. This has profound implications for how we think about evolutionary success. We often measure evolutionary achievement through complexity, adaptability, or ecological dominance. Species that develop advanced behaviors, complex societies, or innovative technologies seem more successful than those that remain essentially unchanged. But the goblin shark reveals the limitations of this framework. Success in evolution isn't about becoming more complex or advanced. It's about finding sustainable solutions to environmental challenges. Sometimes the most effective solution is also the simplest one that works well enough to persist across geological timescales. Their existence also challenges our understanding of deep-sea ecosystems. For decades, marine biologists assumed the deep ocean was a relatively simple environment populated by primitive organisms barely surviving in harsh conditions. The discovery of complex behaviors and sophisticated adaptations in species like goblin sharks reveals a much more dynamic ecosystem. The deep sea isn't a refuge for evolutionary failures. It's a demanding environment that selects for highly specialized adaptations. The organisms that thrive there aren't primitive relics. They're sophisticated solutions to extreme challenges. The goblin shark exemplifies this principle perfectly. Looking at goblin sharks forces us to reconsider what we mean by evolutionary success and biological sophistication. These animals combine ancient anatomy with complex behaviors, primitive appearance with advanced sensory capabilities, and apparent simplicity with remarkable ecological success. They've persisted through multiple mass extinctions, climate changes, and the rise and fall of entire marine ecosystems. They've colonized every ocean basin while maintaining their basic body plan across millions of years. By any reasonable measure, this represents one of evolution's most successful experiments. Perhaps most importantly, goblin sharks remind us that nature's solutions often exceed our imagination. Their jaw mechanism seems impossible until you understand the physics involved. Their survival seems unlikely until you consider their ecological niche. Their success seems improbable until you appreciate the deep ocean's unique selective pressures. So did the goblin shark break the rules of evolution? Not exactly. What it did was demonstrate that the rules we thought existed were actually assumptions based on our limited experience with surface-dwelling organisms. Evolution operates through principles that apply across all environments, but the specific solutions that emerge depend entirely on local conditions and available raw materials. The goblin shark simply represents evolution's answer to a question we hadn't thought to ask. How do you build a predator optimized for hunting in Earth's largest wilderness? The answer turned out to be stranger than anything we could have predicted, and more effective than anything we could have designed. In studying these remarkable creatures, we're not just learning about shark biology or deep-sea ecology. We're discovering the true scope of evolution's creativity and the unexpected forms that biological success can take. The goblin shark proves that in the deep ocean, as in evolution itself, the most extraordinary solutions often hide behind the most unusual appearances.